In a sense, this is the beginning of the limud here. That up until now was more of an introduction, an abundance of questions, which we also discussed at length, where the nekuda, the point of the first portion of chapter 1 is to perplex you, to position a person in a correct mind state for the rest of the study. We also phrased it as buying time. And since now the Alter Rebbe wants to give a lot of background, then in order to buy it with tolerance, to give this background, so first in the beginning of the chapter, he proved that the commonly used terminology or understanding of the terminology, common understanding isn't sufficient, and it leaves you with very many contradictions, seeming contradictions. And therefore, in order to explain these characters, the tzaddik, the Rosh, and the Beinoni more correctly, we will have to deepen our understanding of all of what's the neshama, what's the relationship we have with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, v'chulei. In order to go into that background, then we're going to start. He presented the questions in order to prove that you need that background, and now he's going to start giving the background. So. Before we start reading in here, or we can read the first sentence. I mean, the beginning, the title of everything he's actually going to say for the next 9 chapters. The next portion is the background portion before he goes back to start answering the questions that he's presented, is from here to chapter 9, including. So the answers actually only start at chapter 10. There he starts answering some of the questions he mentioned. Again, redefining the characters. The first questions, if you recall, questions that he started the entire book with, about how should you be sad, should you be happy, how should you see yourself, those he's only going to answer much later on in chapters 26 onwards. But the near questions, just of understanding who the Beinoni is, who the Tzaddik is, who the Rasha is, that he'll answer starting from chapter 10. Now, the nekuda that he wants to explain is this first sentence here, so we'll read it, and then we'll say a few things before we go into the details. He says like this: in order to explain this entire topic, in accordance with what Reb Chaim Vital is Kitvei HaArizal. I mean, everything, all of the Arizal's writings were all written by Reb Chaim Vital. So what Reb Chaim Vital wrote in the Arizal's writings, in the Arizal's name, is Sha'ar HaKedusha. This is where he wrote this. And there are 8 Sha'arim, there are 8 books, and each one there are many Sha'arim. And one of the chapters is called Sha'ar HaKedusha. Uva Etz Chaim, maybe the most famous book by the Arizal, Sha'ar Nun, Perek Bet. That's where these things are written. The Lekol Ish Yisrael, what does he write there? He says every person, every Jew, every man of the people of Israel, echad tzaddik v'echad rasha, whether he's a tzaddik or he's a rasha, yesh shtei neshamot. He has 2 neshamas. Kedichtiv, and he himself learns this from a pasuk. It says so in a verse, an explicit verse. This is in Eyov. It says there, the entire verse is ruach lefanai ya'atov v'neshamot ani asiti. So he only quotes v'neshamot ani asiti, the end of the verse. What's the word there? The Arizal learns that the beginning of the verse is in singular tense, ruach, one spirit. Ruach lefanai ya'atov, which means a spirit will come by me. Like the human spirit, every human individual spirit is conjured of neshamot ani asiti, of 2 or plural neshamot. So the beginning of the verse is in singular tense, and the end of the verse is in plural tense. So it says that each spirit, the spirit is like a personality, like an individual. Each individual is concocted. Is concocted of 2 neshamot. Ruach lefanai ya'atov, neshamot ani asiti. So from this verse, the Arizal, or on this verse, he leans his teaching that every Jew has two neshamot. Now, this is just if you put a period here, then this is, in a sense, one of the biggest chidushim. Again, it's not a chidush at all because it's written in the Arizal, and the Arizal himself learns it from a verse. So it's from a pasuk. So it's bichlal not a chidush. I mean, it's not that there's a machlokes about whether or not, and there are many sources for this. Many books in Kabbalah, preceding Chassidut, many books where this is quoted. And there's a godly soul, or sometimes it's called a nefesh hasichlit, and there's an animal side to the person. It's not a chidush technically that there are two neshamas. Like he's quoting it here from the most basic sources. And again, if you're familiar with other books, then it's mentioned very often. But taking this point, and as we'll see, and as most of us are already familiar with, and making this the center point around which the entire concept of a human being, or the entire explanation of Avodas Hashem, evolves, pivoting all of the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu around this understanding, that is a very big chiddush. Like if we say this very simply, superficially, so the more customarily used phrases is that there's a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Ra, as we're all familiar with that. I mean, even in Chazal, you go throughout the book, the Alter Rebbe will show how very often when Chazal speak about a Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Ra, what they're actually meaning is a Nefesh Elokit or a Nefesh Behemit. But still, even just on the most semantic level, the phrases that were commonly used, and this is true, again, even though, like I said, in many other books, it's mentioned that there is such a thing, but it's still not the commonly used terminology in those books. Still, the terminology evolves around a good inclination and an evil inclination. That's the translation of Yetzer. Yetzer is an inclination. Whereas pivoting and giving a lot of weight, or the most weight, making this point of categorizing a person, of including two souls, not only two inclinations, putting that as the center point of all of the book, or of all of the service of Hashem, that approach, even though it's not a technical chidush, it's a very big chidush of Tanya. It's a very explicit or blunt difference in Tanya. It's the first thing anybody who's been studying Yiddishkeit would notice when he studies Tanya is this point. And before we go into the dissection, again, what he's going to start doing now, and there are many details that need to be noticed on the way. I mean, there's the, like everything we say, there's the point he wants to make, and then there's the details, and we'll have to go into all of those. But before he goes into the explanation of these two souls, which is what the next eight chapters are including, there'll be an explanation of the three. Again, we'll explain all this later in detail, but three layers, if you would, of each soul. The essence of each soul, the kochot hanefesh, the powers of each soul, and the garments of each soul. This is the topics he's going to slide into now. And then that's up to chapter 8. He'll explain, again, also the order of how he explains it. The order itself needs contemplation. That he starts, as we'll see today, I hope already, in this chapter, he starts by explaining the essence of the animal soul. That's the first thing he explains. Then he goes to explain the entire godly soul, the essence of the godly soul in chapter 2, and the powers of the godly soul in chapter 3, and the garments of the godly soul in chapters 4 and 5. Essence, powers, garments. But he first, right now in this chapter, explains the essence of the animal soul. So the order, and we'll have to also contemplate on this, is that there's the essence of the animal soul, then the essence of the godly soul, the powers of the godly soul, the garments of the godly soul, and then he goes back to the powers of the animal soul and the garments of the animal soul. So it's a extraordinary order. You'd think it's not kilu. Doesn't seemingly make sense to any direction. It's not that he explains first the godly soul or first the animal soul. He bounces back and forth. And the order itself needs some contemplation. After that, in chapter 9, he'll explain the person. Again, how do these two souls appear within one psyche? Now, before we go into this detailed study of, again, all the details of each soul, like I said now, first we need to try and understand this point, which is, again, one of the most basic points of Tanya. Now, why does the Alter Rebbe insist on using, it's not just semantics, it's not just terminology, but again, that he changes, he differs from all the other greatest books of Musar, even the books that he himself leans on, of the greatest greats, even in the Arizal. Again, the weight or the terminology the Alter Rebbe uses, even though as he'll explain, they meant the same thing, but his insistence on calling the duality coexisting in a person's life, calling it two souls as opposed to two inclinations, isn't just a semantic difference. I mean, there's a very important content, and it's fundamental to him to insist that my combat, my effort, my challenge in life is the tension between two souls and not two inclinations. Now, again, there could be many things said about this, but the simplest meaning is, just like the literal meaning of these two terms. What's the difference between saying that something is a soul or an inclination? An inclination is implying that who you are is something steady or given. And now you, whoever you are, you incline in several or multiple directions. So you can be inclined to do good, you can be inclined to do bad. You yourself, if that were the case, then you yourself seemingly wouldn't be defined at all. You're not good or bad. You can either do good or either do bad. And this is very, very near, if you're following, similar to how, like, the mindset of measuring the tzaddik and the rasha and the beinoni in the borrowed context. Anybody could behave as a tzaddik, behave as a rasha. If you would, again, if you think about inclinations, then you're leaving the person himself neutral. He could either be good, he could be bad, or he's not good or bad. And the debate is never about who you are. The debate is what you do or what part of yourself you expose. But being yourself is a given. When the Alter Rebbe insists on explaining that all that Chazal discussed about a good inclination, evil inclination, all these inclinations are just the surface of a Jew being concocted of two personalities. Not just one personality inclining in two different directions, two different personalities, two different souls, is implying that the discussion of life or the debate of life is not what I'll do. The debate is who will do, who will be doing, who are you going to be? Not that who you are may be incorporated, may actualize in two different manners. No, the question is, who are you? It's a much more existential question. This introduces to us, obviously, the most important term in Chabad, bittul. That's maybe the most important phrase in Chabad. And also, this understanding can also serve to explain why in Chabad this term is so central. That, as I'll explain, he wants to say that he doesn't want to use a good inclination or bad inclination. He wants to say that there's Kedusha and there's Klipa, there's a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and there's anything that's not a Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's called Kedusha and Klipa. I mean, the equivalent of saying two souls. What is the equivalent of this? Maybe we'll try a little bit to phrase this differently. We said that the describing a person's psyche using two souls and not two inclinations is a chidush of the Alter Rebbe, stressing that point. Not the fact that it's that case, but stressing that point. What can we make similar? What's very similar to this? Also something that's different between Pnimiyut Torah, Chassidus and Kabbalah, and the classic Torah scholar thought, the classic Nigla thought. if I were to ask any God-fearing Jew, what areas are there in life? What categories are there in life? So simply he'd say that there are things that are mitzvahs, there are things that are aveiras, there's bad, there's good, and there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of what we'd call klipas nega. There's a lot of things that aren't bad, they're not forbidden, and they're not a mitzvah either. They're just permitted. There's an enormous area. I mean, the majority of reality is a permitted area. It's not bad, it's not forbidden, and it's not a mitzvah. It's not a commandment. And therefore, under that mindset, then being a God-fearing Jew is mainly about avoiding what's forbidden and doing what's a mitzvah. And what's left in life, so that's where you live in your gray area. All of the whatever is permitted, you can do whatever you want. If you start learning Kabbalah, again, not psychologically, just how Kabbalah understands the objective reality, then you see that in Kabbalah, reality is categorized in two categories, not three categories. It's not that there's what's forbidden, what's permitted, and what's not in between, what's gray. No, in Kabbalah, there are two areas. There's Kedusha and there's Klipa. Now, Kedusha and Klipa is not the same as permitted and forbidden. It's not even a mitzvah and forbidden. Again, there's what is HaKadosh Baruch Hu explicitly, and there's anything else. That's the literal meaning of Klipa. Klipa means a shell or a peel, something that is covering a content. So the true content of anything in reality, the truth of reality, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kedusha. But you have a guess. Don't say Shevet or don't say anything. Again, the true content of anything in reality is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But if that's not apparent, then that object in reality is not Kedusha. The literal, simple meaning of Kedusha is that there's a certain object which is apparently Hashem. Hashem appears in a certain object. He's present in that object. If it's not apparent, so the object's own reality is concealing on its content that it's really part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I mean, everything's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But if a certain object doesn't seem part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so that's called a klipa, a shell, a peel. There's something shelling, encapsulating Hashem, concealing Hashem. So the phrase klipa, which in Kabbalah is synonym with a derogatory phrase, it's like saying bad. So any Kubal you speak to, if you say the word klipa, you're saying something bad, the bad of reality. But the literal meaning is not bad. It's not the same as if a Torah scholar says something bad, then he means something forbidden. It's an aveira. When you say klipa, you don't mean it's an aveira. You just mean it's not a mitzvah. And it's not explicitly Hashem. Any reality that doesn't explicitly express its content is shelled. So it's a klipa. It's concealed. It's concealing its true nature. That it's part of the unity of Hashem. That's it. Again, so this is a very, very different approach to how I view life. That it's not a question like if I were to ask, like we said before, if I want to go eat a sandwich. So if you ask the average Jew in the street, what do I need to consider as a religious Jew? What do I need to consider before I eat a sandwich? So he'd say that you probably need to check the hechsher, if it's kosher. And if it's kosher, it's the best hechsher in the world, then okay, then there's no problem. But if you think in the terms of Kabbalah, if I want to go eat a sandwich, what do I need to think about? So the first question is, why do I eat a sandwich? Is this Kedusha? Am I serving Hashem here? Is it something that expresses Hashem or conceals Hashem? And whether or not it's kosher is seemingly irrelevant, or it only becomes relevant in the second stage. That if eating this sandwich is an act of revealing Hashem, that's my motivation here, then it's Kedusha, then it's a good thing to do. And now you need to check if it's kosher. if you're permitted to do it. You may not be permitted to do it. But the initial question isn't, again, there is no such thing as a permitted area. There's no objective permitted area. There's only Kedusha and Klipa. Anything that is Hashem is Kedusha, is good. It's very black and white. And Kabbalah is much more extreme that way. The reality, any reality is either Hashem or not. Now, if it's not Hashem, then it could be something that's objectively concealing Hashem, that you can't elevate it. It could be something that you can elevate. That's called Klipat Noga, as we'll explain. But that something can be elevated doesn't make it more elevated than something else. It's just a potential. It's a capability to elevate. Very similar to that is the Alter Rebbe's approach of how he wants to describe your psychological stance. Saying that there are two souls is saying that both your inclinations are evil. That's the simple meaning. That your good inclination and your bad inclination are both bad. They're both klipa. Not only that, but if we say this, then moreover, once you understand things that way, then what's the effort of life? What's avodas Hashem? Avodas Hashem is allowing a Kadosh Baruch Hu to appear, not concealing a Kadosh Baruch Hu. That my reality should not conceal Hashem. Having a godly soul is implying that there's a part of me or there's something within me that's not me. Neshama shenatata bi. There's a soul that is a Kadosh Baruch Hu being present. It's not my presence, it's Hashem's presence. Anything that's expressing me is concealing that. So anything I do that's an expression of myself, seemingly, or at least of my initial egocentric self, which is my simple self, just my sense of self, is expressing me and not expressing Hashem. Now, I myself can look to express myself in very bad ways, and even I can look to express myself in good ways. Sometimes people want to express themselves, so they beat everybody up and steal all the money in the world. Okay. So that's blunt, easy evil. But that you could call an evil inclination. But also the phrase inclination is inherently meaning that it's me. It's my inclination. So also my good inclination. Let's say I don't want to express myself as a thief. I want to be remembered as a philanthropic, or as a caretaker, as a chassid, as a talmid chacham. This is my inclination. Still, it's me expressing myself. So it's still klipa. It's all klipa. It's all concealing Hashem. When the Alter Rebbe insists on rephrasing these terms, he wants to stress this point, that when the Torah says Yetzer Tov, it doesn't mean your good inclination. It means that there's a piece of Hashem in you, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is apparent within your life. And wherever you bring Hashem into reality, you express HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's called good. If you're expressing yourself, that's klipa. You're already concealing Hashem. Now, as he'll explain in a couple of lines down here in this very chapter, he'll explain that within your sense of self, there's also good and bad. That there are people who want to express themselves in a very coarse, evil way, and there are other people who want to express themselves in a much more gentle, good way. But it's not holy. It's not kedusha. It's still klipa. So generally, it's bad. It's all bad. Wanting to express myself as a talmid chacham is also bad.
Can I ask a question? Does maybe inclination means inclined to conceal?
It's being, maybe I'm not explaining myself well. What is the concealment on Hashem? Maybe we'll discuss this objectively and then we'll discuss it psychologically. Maybe it's easier to understand technically. If I look around me, I don't see Hashem. Why don't I see HaKadosh Baruch Hu? I see all kinds of artifacts, books and walls and tables. I see all sorts of things. Now, none of them express HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why don't they express Hashem? What do they express? So even though it's a funny way of phrasing things to say that the table expresses itself. But when I look at a table, not that I see a table, and I see it as a self-contained, independent, I created myself thing. That's called the table expressing itself. So there's a certain reality here that even though essentially it's only Hashem, it's not that fact isn't exposed. That's a concealed fact. Where is Hashem's presence concealed? It's just concealed within the expression of self. That the table expresses itself without doing anything, just its being, its form of existence as an individual is inherently concealing its true nature as being part of the unity of Hashem. So it doesn't need to do anything. It's not an evil table. It doesn't need to knock you on the head. It's just that you see it as a shell. You see its shelled version. You see it as a klipa on Hashem's presence. You don't see Hashem. You see it conceals Hashem. So that's called it's a klipa. Is this table something that can't be elevated? No, maybe it's a klipas noiga. Like if you take the classic example in Torah or all the mitzvahs, you take the skin of an animal and you turn it into tefillin. So what are you doing? You're reshaping. You're taking the personality of the cow. There's a cow walking down the street. So the cow, it doesn't express a Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's klipa. Again, it's not a bad cow. It can be a very nice cow, but it's just a cow. It's part of Hashem's unity. It's part of Hashem's expression of his self. But it's not noticeable. It's instead of exposing Hashem, it's concealing Hashem. Now, if you take the cow and you refine its individuality and you reform its shape to express something that's explicitly Hashem's will. So Hashem in his Torah, he revealed 613 of his wills, or not that he revealed, he wanted things. So Hashem wanted tefillin, black boxes of a certain size and shape and form. And when I take the cow skin and I impose on it Hashem's will, so it becomes apparently annulled to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's called it's Kedusha. That's the simple meaning of Kedusha. Now there's an artifact that isn't, again, it's not expressing itself anymore. Instead of expressing itself, its reality is expressing Hashem. It's expressing Hashem's will. It's formed in Hashem's shape, Hashem's will's shape. So it's explicit and noticeably annulled to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's called Kedusha. It's the very same thing when you say two souls. Also, my personality is the very same thing. My inherent sense of self is concealing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not by doing any Avera, just by being something other than Hashem, experiencing myself that way and expressing myself that way. Already I'm concealing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's unity, just like the table. Even with a human being, it's much more so because a human being has an awareness of self. He has a conscious sense of self. Again, the table, if I weren't aware of it as being separate of Hashem, then it really wouldn't be separate from Hashem. It would just everything. Like if you try to imagine all of creation without a person, without people, so everything's godly completely. Everything exists within godliness. This is like how a Chazal phrase existence before Chet Etzadat, before the eating of the tree of knowledge. Before there was self-awareness. I mean, I could explain this before many times. The word knowledge and the word knowledge in Torah means dat, and the word dat is like muda'ut. It means awareness. It means awareness more than it means okay. They're going to say hello. Hello. Again, the word knowledge, da'at, etzadat in Torah refers to not to knowledge as in the conventional sense as we use it today, but muda'ut, that's the word in Hebrew. The da'at means muda'ut, awareness of self. So before we ate from the tree of knowledge, there was no awareness of self. It's a little bit hard to. It's a paradoxical phrase. What does it mean? It's like that known paradox. If a tree falls in the woods and nobody hears it, did it make a sound or not? So why is that a philosophical question? Because really saying that a table conceals on Hashem, who does it conceal on Hashem to? The word concealing is a subjective term. It means that there's a subject, there's an awareness. So BMS, only when there's a person. Why am I saying all this? Just that it's not just that we are worse than a table. Really, the only problem exists in human awareness. Also, the table being an objective concealment is only something that exists because there's a subject viewing and experiencing the object. Okay, so the subject donates more to objectivity than the object. Because the object wouldn't exist unless there was a subject experiencing. Okay, so back to our point. That's why, again, the Alter Rebbe's understanding of Kabbalah is much more simple, much more true than the simple understanding. That when you say Kedusha and Klipa, you're first and foremost referring to a person, to the souls, the psyche of a person. That I have two ways of experiencing reality. I can experience myself as being separate from my source. That's called klipa. That I'm a shell concealing my true essence, my true reality as being part of Hashem. Or I can experience that everything's Hashem. I can be part of Hashem's experience of reality. And then my reality is an expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If my reality is an expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's Kedusha. When he says that he wants to explain that the good and the bad within a person are not two inclinations, but two souls, this is what he wants to stress. In very simple terms, he wants to undermine the misconception that a person's good inclinations are Kedusha. That's the most important point. Our simplest tendency is to consider our delicate spiritual tendencies to be something holy. And this is what he wants to stress, that that's not the case at all. And that if it's your delicate spirituality, as long as it's you, it's klipa. That's the definition of being klipa. And Kedusha means that there's another soul that's not part of it's not part of myself. It's not part of my individual separate sense of self. It's neshama shenatatabi, as we'll learn in the next chapter. That's the first thing he says about the godly soul. Shanefesh elokiti chelek elokami. It's part of Hashem. It's not part of you. It's chelek elokami mamash. Yeah, so this is the most important point of understanding. I'm sure these are basics that we've discussed before in our classes. It's very, very important that when you say two souls, what you're looking to explain is that inclinations are part of one personality. And when the Torah said Yetzer Hatov, it didn't mean that you are inclined in two directions. It means that that Hashem is inclined through you and that you are inclined through you. And you can be inclined in various directions, but as long as it's you, that's called Klipa. This is what Reb Chaim Vital says in his book, that there are two souls. One of them is entirely Klipa. When I say that there are two personalities, then I'm implying that each personality has inclinations. Each soul has inclinations and garments. I mean, each soul is an entire life, an entire world. For instance, a non-Jew only has one soul, and he definitely has inclinations and debates and good and bad and ups and downs, all as part of being himself. Kedusha begins where that ends. In the beginning of Kedusha is saying that there's something other than your expression of self. And also, as we'll explain, also your godly soul has kiviyachol inclinations. It's inclined upwards to Hashem, and it needs to annul itself downwards to creation. So there's a lot of details to discuss about it. But that just this basic concept of introducing two souls as opposed to two inclinations is a very fundamental thing to understand. Now, after he's explained that, now he's going to go and say that very thing. That maybe we'll phrase this in another way. Just understanding this point that when Torah says good or bad, this is what it means. Kedusha or Klipa. Just if you understand that, you can read Tanya. If you don't have this in your mind, mamish, understand this clearly, you read Tanya, you won't understand the word. So just understanding what the literal meaning of good and bad is can already enable you to open the book and read and understand. Every time he says something good or something bad, you need to translate it that way. That it's what he's saying is you or not you. Now, when I say it that way, it sounds very, very harsh. Being yourself is the worst thing in the world. So that's not completely true at all, as we'll see. I mean, Hashem's presence penetrates yourself. But just to understand it technically and correctly, in order to not, I don't want to compromise the truth. I don't want to say something more friendly and compromise everything back to your inclinations. Because again, a person's tendency is to the other extreme, to easily consider all of his spirituality. That's if you're a Chabadnik, you hear a sentence like that, immediately it makes you bounce. Your spirituality, if it's yours, it's not spirituality. And that's not true. It's spirituality, but it's klipa. It's all klipa. It's all part of yourself. And Kedusha is an expression of Hashem. Now, this understanding is why the phrase bittul, the term bittul, is so important in Chassidus. Any Kedusha is always bittul. It's in your stead. Now, I'm saying in brackets that it's not, such a statement sounds so unnatural and countering all of your personality and everything. Okay, that's not the truth. The true truth is that also yourself is part of godliness. But if the first understanding isn't a sharp differentiation, as we explained it, there's a famous quotation that we like quoting from Harav Kook Zatzal. He was a Lubavitcher from his mother's side, very Hasidic neshama, of course. A big tzaddik. He said once about Tanya that the Alter Rebbe, he rips a person in half. He said it not derogatorily, but he said it as he criticized Tanya that time. And even though he was a great chassid, he wasn't. It's not that he disagreed with Tanya, but he felt when you learn Tanya, so initially it tears you in two. It's so unnatural. Anything that's you is bad, and anything that's good is not you. So it's very, very harsh to view things that way. It's called havdalah. And that's true. It's very, very harsh to say that. And we're not completely saying that as a conclusion. But if you don't say it with its entire harshness, then you're going to end up with a misconception. So in order to really sweeten the klipa, fix the klipa, you first have to be able to differentiate very, very clearly between the two. And that's what he does by stressing that the duality of a person is not two inclinations, two souls. And by saying that, I'm implying that both your inclinations are bad. Also your good inclinations. Everything you thought was a good inclination. This is already much, much nearer to our essential understanding of the tzaddik and the rasha and the beinoni. Now we can start already feeling how he's going to measure what a beinoni is, what a tzaddik is. Because even your good inclination is bad. So that's a tzaddik. A tzaddik is someone with a good inclination. But it's all him. That's the problem. So it's all klipa. So to the Alter Rebbe, your Yetzer Tov is, in a way, you could say, that the biggest Yetzer Hara is to think that there's a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara. Like if the Yetzer Hara, if the Satan, right, if the devil manages to convince you that your efforts in life should all be targeted to your good inclinations. Like, don't aspire to be a movie star, aspire to be a Rosh Hashiva. If the Yetzer Hara can convince you to recruit all of your life to cultivating your good aspirations, good per se, then he's already won. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu will never appear there. And the debate, who should be appearing, am I, never starts. I'm who I am. That's Pashut. Now, where should I aspire? Should I incline to good or should I incline to bad? Once I find myself centered on inclinations, I've lost the entire game from the get-go, because I'm not even, who I am isn't even up for a debate. So in a sense, the biggest Yetzer Hara is thinking about Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov. That's Bemet HaMaaseh Satan. The Yetzer Hara, for very many years, many generations, managed to convince Jews that this is what it's all about. Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara. That itself is a Yetzer Hara. But really what our sages mean when they say Yetzer Hara is nefesh, behemit nefesh elokit. And the Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara, the inclinations in that view are both part of the animal soul. So it's all part of your sense of self. So this is a very, very important point. From this point onwards, we'll start now understanding the details of each one of these souls. So B'ezrat Hashem. So we'll stop now, and we'll continue next week. B'ezrat Hashem. I hope I'm time to get shalom.